Nobody in Bracken Point knew why a U.S. Marine and his German Shepherd had vanished near the old ferry terminal. Then, 72-year-old Ruth Calder followed 3 measured barks into a locked maintenance shed. "Don't be afraid," she said when she saw the chains. "I'll save you both." The Marine warned that 6 men were coming back, but Harbor kept returning to a sealed crate hidden behind the wall. 36 hours later, 200 Marines arrived on the same shoreline, not for revenge. Subscribe and stay to discover what they came to do. Nobody in Bracken Point knew why a U.S. Marine and his German Shepherd had vanished near the old ferry terminal. At 2:15 that afternoon, Staff Sergeant Daniel Cross had missed a scheduled radio check. By 3, a dispatcher had marked his delivery delayed. At 3:40, Ruth Calder turned her faded pickup onto the terminal road, with a pair of red-handled bolt cutters lying across the passenger seat. She wasn't looking for Daniel. She had never heard his name. Ruth came to the terminal every Thursday before bad weather, the same as she had when Sam was alive. The ferry had stopped running 9 years earlier, after the new bridge took most of its traffic, but the tide gauge still worked when somebody cared enough to clear salt from its housing. The outer padlock had rusted through the last storm. Ruth intended to cut it off, replace it, record the water level, and be home before the first rain band crossed the Sound. That was the whole plan. The old place looked smaller each year. Gray boards leaned into gray sky. Beach grass pushed through cracks in the service lane, and the amber beacon above the west office had not turned since the winter Sam's heart gave out. Ruth parked beneath it and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. At 72, she had learned not to rise too quickly after a long drive. Her knees preferred notice. She had fair skin weathered by salt and sun, hazel eyes that missed very little, and silver hair braided into a low bun because loose hair had no place near engines. Sam used to say she approached every problem as if it had already wasted 5 minutes of her time. He meant it fondly, usually. Ruth reached for the bolt cutters. The first bark came as her shoes touched the gravel. 3 measured notes sounded from the east maintenance shed, not frantic, not loose. Each bark was separated from the next by almost the same interval. Then nothing. Ruth stood beside the pickup and listened. Wind moved through the marsh reeds beyond the terminal. A loose length of halyard tapped against the old flagpole. Farther out, thunder rolled so low it might have been a truck crossing the bridge. 3 more barks came from behind the locked shed. Ruth changed direction. North Star Salvage had been using the eastern bay since the first storm, clearing debris under a temporary county contract. Their new chain hung across the main sliding door, but Ruth still held an authorized key to the narrow service entrance beside the radio office. The key resisted. She leaned her shoulder into the swollen door until damp wood released with a tired groan. The barking stopped. For one suspended second, the building gave her nothing. Then metal scraped slowly across concrete. Ruth tightened both hands around the cutters and stepped inside. The shed smelled of wet rope, diesel, and old wood. Thin daylight entered between wallboards, laying pale stripes across the floor. Stacked tarps divided the interior into narrow aisles. Ruth passed the first one, rounded a rack of rusted ferry parts, and saw the man against the far wall. He was broad enough to make the space around him appear cramped, even seated with one shoulder pressed to the boards. An olive-drab shirt stretched across a muscular frame. His dark brown hair had fallen forward from whatever neat shape it once held, and short stubble shadowed a square jaw. A heavy chain ran from his wrists to an anchor ring set into the concrete. Another secured one ankle. Beside him sat a German Shepherd, black and tan, athletic beneath a coat dulled by dust. The dog wore a faded blue collar. Its chain ran to a second ring several feet away, short enough that it could not reach the man. The Marine raised his head. His brown eyes went first to Ruth, then to the red handles in her hands, then past her toward the door. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you need to leave." Ruth walked closer. "There are 6 of them," he said. "They took a truck toward the south dock. They said they'd be back when the tide changed." "When does it change?" He glanced at the narrow band of light under the wall. "Sooner than I need it to." Ruth set one knee carefully on the concrete. The German Shepherd watched her without lunging or shrinking away. Its ears remained forward, and its attention moved between her hands and the Marine's face. "Don't be afraid," Ruth said. "I'll save you both." Something shifted in the Marine's expression. Not disbelief exactly, more like a man discovering that the world had introduced a fact for which he had no prepared response. "Cut Harbor loose first," he said. "That's his name?" "Yes, ma'am." "And yours?" "Daniel Cross." "Ruth Calder." She placed the cutter jaws around the chain near Harbor's anchor ring. "Tell him I need him still." Daniel's voice changed when he addressed the dog. It became lower and more precise, stripped of everything except instruction. "Harbor, down, hold." The shepherd lowered itself to the concrete. Ruth tested the angle once, shifted the jaws closer to a narrower link, and leaned her weight into the handles. Her shoulders remembered the motion better than her hands did. Sam had used these cutters on corroded dock chain, fencing wire, and once a length of cable that had wrapped itself around a propeller shaft during a storm. He had kept the hinge oiled. Even after 5 years in the cabinet, it moved cleanly. The link resisted. Ruth adjusted her grip. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said. "That sentence has never improved a job already underway." She pressed again. The link opened with a hard metallic snap. Harbor rose but did not bolt. He crossed the short distance to Daniel, touched his nose once to the man's shoulder, then turned his body toward Ruth. Up close, she could see the controlled tension in him. Weight forward, breathing quick but even, waiting for the next instruction. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, his attention was steady again. "Thank you," he said. "I'm not finished." Ruth moved to his wrist chain. The steel was thicker than Harbor's and newly fitted, bright against the older anchor hardware. Daniel shifted his hand so she could place the cutter without catching his skin. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "A little over 4 hours." "Water?" "They gave me half a bottle before they left." "Harbor?" "Same, I made sure." "Of course you did," Ruth thought. She did not say it. The way the dog remained close to him had already answered every question about which of them Daniel considered his responsibility. The first attempt barely marked the link. Ruth sat back, breathed once, and examined the chain instead of fighting it. Sam had never believed in becoming angry at metal. Metal did not care. You studied where it had been joined, found the part that had less choice, and applied pressure there. She repositioned the jaws beside the welded seam. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel looked toward the door again. A utility truck was stopped on the terminal road, hood up, one man waving for help. When I pulled over, 2 vehicles closed the road behind me. His eyes moved to Harbor. They used a catch pole on him, 6 men. I could keep resisting, or I could make sure they didn't hurt my dog. There was no apology in his voice, but Ruth heard the shape of one beneath it. "You made the useful choice," she said. "It doesn't feel useful from this side of a chain." Most useful choices don't announce themselves properly. Ruth bore down. Pain moved through her wrists and into her elbows. For a moment the link held. Then the seam split, and Daniel pulled his hands free. He did not stand immediately. He rubbed feeling back into his fingers, flexed them once, and reached for Harbor. The dog pressed its shoulder beneath his hand. Ruth shifted toward the ankle restraint, but Harbor moved away. "Harbor," Daniel said. The shepherd crossed to the rear wall, stopped beside a stack of folded canvas, and pushed his nose into a narrow gap between 2 boards. He inhaled, backed away, then returned to the same point. One front paw scraped the wood. "Leave it," Daniel said. Harbor looked at him and went back to the gap. Daniel's expression tightened. "My radio pouch." "You're sure?" "He knows my scent. They took the pouch when they stopped me." Ruth followed the dog's line of attention. The boards were newer than the surrounding wall, their nail heads bright. A false partition. She slid the tip of one cutter handle into the seam and pulled. The lower board flexed enough to reveal darkness, the corner of a white shipping crate, and a strip of blue lettering beneath a second label. "Disaster Relief." Daniel leaned forward. "That's what I saw them moving. Generators, radio packs, medical cooling units. They weren't taking debris out. They were taking supplies." Ruth looked at the sealed crate, then at the man on the floor. "And they know you saw it?" "Yes." The first drops of rain ticked against the metal roof. Ruth lowered the cutters to Daniel's ankle chain. "Then we take the dog, we take whatever proof fits in 2 hands, and we leave." "There's an exit?" "There was when people still knew how this building worked." She found the welded seam and set the jaws. Outside, an engine turned off the terminal road. Daniel went still. Harbor's ears lifted toward the service door. A second engine followed the first. then a third. Headlights moved through the gaps in the boards, long white bars sliding across the concrete. Doors opened in the rain. 1, 2, more after that. Daniel looked at the ankle chain, then at Ruth. "They're early," he said. 6 shadows crossed the thin light beneath the main door. The 6 shadows stopped outside the main door. Ruth set the cutter jaws against the welded seam of Daniel's ankle chain. Daniel braced the loose length with both hands, keeping it away from his boot. Harbor stood between them and the door, ears forward, body still. A key entered the outer padlock. "How long?" Daniel whispered. "Longer if you keep asking." Ruth leaned into the handles. The first pressure sent a complaint through both wrists. She shifted one hand closer to the hinge, tried again, and felt the seam begin to give. Outside, a man said, "Why is her truck here?" Another voice answered too quietly for Ruth to catch. The chain opened. Daniel pulled his ankle free and rose in one controlled movement. He reached down when Ruth stood, but she was already using the wall for balance. He withdrew his hand without making the offer into a performance. The outer chain rattled. "Harbor," Daniel breathed. "Close." The shepherd returned to his left leg. Ruth crossed to the false wall and widened the gap with one cutter handle. Harbor pushed his muzzle through, caught the edge of a black canvas pouch, and drew it out by its strap. Daniel took it, opened the flap, and found the radio gone. The waterproof notebook and a compact signal mirror remained. "They missed the book," he said. Ruth pointed through the gap. "Can you read the crate number?" He leaned close. "NRS 4471, barge stencil under it, Bellwether Dawn." Ruth lifted her phone and took 3 photographs. The white crate, the blue disaster relief lettering beneath the false label, and the barge name sprayed near the base. Then she lowered the board into place. The main padlock opened. "This way." She led them behind the old compressor rack. At floor level, a steel handle lay almost flush with the boards. Sam had painted it yellow once, but years of salt had reduced the color to a few stubborn patches. Ruth pulled. The panel did not move. Daniel stepped beside her. "Lift, then pull," she said. "The track sags on the right." He followed the instruction. A narrow section of wall slid inward, revealing a service passage no wider than Daniel's shoulders. The main door began to rise. Ruth entered first. The passage ran behind the flood bulkhead, level for most of its length, then turned toward the abandoned inspection platform. Daniel followed with Harbor between them. He drew the hidden panel closed just as gray daylight spread across the maintenance floor behind them. The voices changed immediately. "Cross," a man called. No answer. Boots moved fast over concrete. A chain struck the floor. Ruth continued through the dark, one hand sliding along the bulkhead. Sam had designed the passage to reach the tide chamber when stacked machinery blocked the main bay. He had complained for 30 years that nobody remembered it existed until a storm jammed a door. Ruth had remembered. That was the difference between a building being abandoned and merely being unattended. Behind them, a voice said, "Find the woman." Daniel touched Ruth's shoulder once and pointed ahead. A pale rectangle marked the far hatch. "They'll see your truck," he whispered. "They already did." "Then they know who you are. They know what I drive. Half of Bracken Point knows what I drive." That isn't reassuring. It wasn't intended to be. The passage ended at a waist-high latch. Ruth opened it onto the elevated tide walkway, a covered strip of metal grating behind the west office. Rain had begun in earnest, slanting across the marsh and turning the sound into a soft, continuous hiss. The walkway remained hidden from the parking area by the old concrete flood wall. They moved west. Daniel favored the restrained ankle but did not slow. Harbor stayed close without pulling, glancing back each time a door slammed inside the shed. Ruth unlocked the west radio office and let them in. The room smelled of dust and old paper. A green metal desk occupied one wall. Above it, a map of the coast had faded until water and land were nearly the same color. Sam's radio sat beneath the window, covered by a canvas hood. Ruth removed the hood. "Please tell me that works," Daniel said. "It worked last Thursday." That wasn't the answer I expected. Good equipment doesn't need optimism. She checked the battery meter, switched to the county emergency frequency, and handed Daniel the microphone. His posture changed as soon as it touched his palm. Whatever uncertainty the chains had forced into him narrowed into procedure. He identified himself, gave the terminal location, described unlawful restraint, and suspected diversion of emergency supplies, then read the crate number and barge name from his notebook. The operator asked him to repeat each item. Daniel did, without adding anything he had not directly seen. 2 people and 1 dog secure in the West office, he finished. 6 individuals believed to be in the East Maintenance Bay. No confrontation in progress. The operator told them to remain inside. County units and emergency medical staff were on the way. Daniel returned the microphone to its hook. How secure is this office? Ruth looked at the thin door. Emotionally or structurally? Despite himself, he almost smiled. Structurally? It is held against several hurricanes. People aren't hurricanes. No, hurricanes are more patient. Across the terminal grounds, Wade Mercer stood over 2 cut chains and understood that the afternoon had moved beyond anything he could contain. He was 46, thick through the chest from years on commercial decks, with hands permanently roughened by rope and salt. North Star had given him work after a storm took his boat, and the bank took what remained. For 3 years, he had treated that fact as a debt. Now, the debt lay open on the floor in 2 pieces. "Call Roke," one of the men said. Wade looked toward the false wall. The lower board was no longer seated correctly. "Not yet." He said call when we got back. "And I'll call when I know what I'm telling him." He sent 2 men toward the south dock and 2 toward the service road. He kept the 6th inside with him. That left 90 seconds, perhaps 2 minutes, before somebody noticed the west office door had been opened. At North Star's temporary dispatch room, 12 miles inland, Owen Pike watched 6 access events appear on his monitor. The East Bay contractor code was his. Beneath it sat a second entry from Ruth Calder's old service key. Owen had known Ruth since he was 14. Sam had taught him how to clean corrosion from radio contacts and how to write a maintenance note that another person could understand. Owen had rerouted Daniel's delivery that morning because Wade called it overflow storage. He had not asked why a relief shipment needed a route change that bypassed the county warehouse. The 2 access records on the screen answered the question he should have asked. Owen opened the vehicle log, selected the last 6 North Star movements, and sent the file to the county tip address without his name. Then he sat with his hands above the keyboard, unable to decide whether anonymity made the act cautious or small. Sirens reached the terminal 8 minutes later. Wade heard them first and ordered everyone away from the west side. By the time county vehicles entered the lot, North Star's workers were standing in the open with empty hands. Ruth watched through the radio office blinds as officers separated them, then established a boundary around the East Maintenance Bay. Emergency personnel came to the west door by way of the public walkway, keeping the 2 spaces distinct. Daniel answered questions in the order they were asked. Harbor accepted water, drank, then sat with his shoulder against Daniel's leg. Ruth gave an investigator her phone and watched him enlarge the photographs. In the East Bay, air pressure shifted when the main door opened. One corner of fresh white sealing tape lifted from crate NRS F 71. Beneath it, blue letters emerged against the gray plastic. Bracken Point Regional Medical Center. The investigator did not touch the label. He photographed it exactly as it had revealed itself, then stepped back and requested an evidence team. Daniel saw the image on Ruth's phone when it was returned. "Medical cooling units," he said. "That's why the crates were insulated." "And why somebody wanted the original destination covered," Ruth replied. A county supervisor approached with a printed copy of Owen's partial log. 3 North Star trucks had traveled between the regional relief warehouse and the Bellwether Dawn over the previous 48 hours. The routes did not match their authorized cleanup assignments. The evidence was enough to secure the terminal and begin tracing the barge. It was not yet enough to explain who had ordered the transfers or how far they reached. Ruth understood the distinction. Proof was rarely a complete door. More often it was the first hinge. Rain struck the windows harder. The old radio interrupted with a weather alert tone. Everyone in the west office went quiet. The storm that had been expected to turn northeast had slowed over warmer water. Its projected path now crossed the outer coast near Bracken Point. Landfall was possible within 4 days. The announcer advised residents to review evacuation routes and warned that the county might close the main bridge if sustained winds arrived earlier than forecast. Ruth looked at the faded wall map. North of the terminal, the bridge rose high and new over the sound. South of it sat 3 low communities, a medical annex, and miles of road that flooded from both sides when the tide and wind agreed with each other. The official evacuation arrows all pointed toward the same bridge approach. If that approach closed, the people south of the ferry terminal would have nowhere on the current map to go. Ruth stared at the blank space where Sam used to mark old service roads in pencil. For the first time that afternoon, the 6 men outside were no longer the largest problem in Bracken Point. The paramedic wrapped a pressure cuff around Daniel's arm while he watched the weather map instead of the numbers on the monitor. Harbour sat beside the examination cot in the West Radio office, his faded blue collar now attached to a temporary lead someone had found in a county vehicle. "You can look at me," the paramedic said. Daniel turned his head. Light dehydration, strained wrists, irritation around the ankle. "Nothing here says you need a hospital if you agree to be checked again this evening." "Agreed." That sounded suspiciously easy. "I've had a complicated afternoon." Harbour received the same practical attention from a veterinarian who had driven over from the mainland clinic. She checked his breathing, paws, gums, shoulders, and the area beneath his collar. Harbour tolerated the examination with the grave patience of a dog who considered cooperation part of the job. "Tired, thirsty, and offended," the veterinarian said, "but physically sound." Daniel rested one hand against Harbour's neck. Only then did some of the tension leave his shoulders. Ruth noticed. She was standing at Sam's old desk with a fresh cup of coffee she had no memory of making. People had filled the West office in the hour since the rescue. County personnel, emergency staff, 2 investigators, and now Lydia Shaw from Bracken Point Emergency Management. Yet Ruth kept seeing the shed as it had been before all of them arrived. 1 Marine, 1 dog, 2 chains, and a problem that did not improve by being stared at. Daniel waited until the veterinarian left before speaking quietly. "I should have seen the setup." Ruth looked at him over her cup. "The truck?" The road was too clean. No tire marks on the shoulder. The hood was up, but there was no steam. Harbour alerted before I stopped. He rubbed one wrist with the other hand. "I thought he was reacting to the men in the tree line. I kept going because somebody was waving for help." "That sounds like a reason you stopped, not proof that you failed." 6 men got control of the situation. 6 men built a situation before you arrived. Those are different statements. Daniel's jaw tightened. "It doesn't change where you found me." "No, I found you making sure your dog got water before you did." Ruth set down the cup. "If you intend to feel ashamed, at least choose the correct part." He studied her, perhaps searching for softness hidden inside the sentence. Ruth had not put any there. He gave a small nod anyway. Across the room, Lydia Shaw cleared a section of Sam's faded wall map. She was 45, compact, with short dark hair threaded by early gray, and the focused expression of someone accustomed to receiving incomplete information during bad weather. She wore a county rain jacket over office clothes and carried 2 phones, both of which seemed determined to interrupt her. "Mrs. Calder," Lydia said, "you mentioned the areas south of the bridge. 3 communities, the medical annex, 2 marina roads, and everything along Heron Cut. We have evacuation plans for all of them. Every arrow on that plan points north to the same bridge approach, because it's the approved high-capacity route. Until it closes." Lydia's expression did not change. "Do you have another route?" Ruth looked toward the green cabinet beneath the old radio shelves. She had not opened it since the week after Sam passed away. The county had asked for his terminal records then, and Ruth had given them the current maintenance binders from the desk. What remained in the cabinet was older, notebooks he kept, because computers forgot things whenever salt water reached the wrong wire. The key was still on Ruth's ring. She crossed the room, unlocked the cabinet, and paused with her fingers on the handle. Sam's handwriting waited behind that door. She knew it would. The knowledge had been enough for 5 years. She had not needed to see it. Daniel said nothing. Harbour rose and came to Ruth's side, then stopped without touching her. Ruth opened the cabinet. 6 tied books stood upright beside a rolled survey chart, a brass compass, and a metal box of radio crystals no modern set would ever use. The newest notebook had a blue cloth cover darkened at the edges by Sam's hands. Ruth took it out. His name was written inside in black block letters, Samuel Calder. Beneath it, in smaller script, he had added, "If found, return it. It knows more than you do." Ruth almost smiled. Almost. She spread the rolled chart across the desk. Sam had drawn pencil lines over an old county elevation survey, marking tide heights, culvert failures, and the places where water crossed the roads first. One line ran south from the terminal, curved inland over a raised shell bed, and joined the old forestry road beyond Heron Cut. Daniel leaned over the map. Lantern Ridge. That's what Sam called it, Ruth said. It isn't much of a ridge. 3 feet can feel like a mountain when everything around it is flat. Lydia traced the line without touching the paper. This route isn't on our current emergency map. It was a ferry service road. Fuel and repair trucks used it before the bridge. When was it last inspected? Ruth turned pages. Sam drove it 6 years ago. Then I cannot send evacuation traffic onto it. Daniel looked up. She's not asking you to do that without checking. Good, because I won't. Lydia pulled her tablet closer. I need current elevation readings, culvert condition, surface width, tree clearance, and confirmed access at both ends. A handwritten map can tell us where to look. It cannot tell us the road is safe today. Ruth respected the answer because it did not insult Sam and did not worship him. It placed the work where it belonged. Then we check it, she said. Daniel studied the symbols in the chart margins. Small circles appeared every few miles, each paired with a frequency number and a letter. These aren't road notes. Radio checks, Ruth said. Sam tested portable sets from each high point. The letters mark where he could reach the terminal directly and where he needed a relay. Daniel took his waterproof notebook from the recovered pouch and began copying the sequence. If those points still have line of sight, you could build a communications chain from the southern communities to the county net, even if cellular service drops. Lydia looked at the symbols again, this time longer. How many trained operators would it take? She asked. For continuous coverage, with backups, at least 20. More if we add transport and generators. I don't have 20 spare operators. Daniel picked up Ruth's desk phone. May Alvarez answered on the third ring. Daniel put her on speaker only after asking. Her voice was low, direct, and entirely awake despite the rain-heavy hour. He told her what had happened without dramatizing it. He described the diverted relief equipment, the approaching storm, Sam's possible service route, and the need for radio operators. He did not describe the chains until May asked why his voice sounded wrong. When he finished, silence held the line for 2 seconds. How many people do you want? May asked. Skilled people, Daniel said. No confrontation. Nobody comes looking for North Star. This stays under local emergency management. That wasn't my question. Daniel glanced at Lydia. 200, Lydia said. Maximum, conditional on names, skills, vehicles, and a staging plan. They report through the emergency structure, or they do not come. May heard her. Current Marines on approved leave, reservists, and former Marines. All already working civilian relief assignments in the Carolinas. No uniforms required, no weapons, no claim of official deployment. Send me the roster, Lydia said. You will have it in 1 hour. Outside the west office window, the weather vane above the maintenance roof began to turn. It moved slowly at first, the arrow dragging from northeast toward east. Then a stronger gust caught it. The vane swung past east, trembled, and fixed southeast, straight toward the open water where the storm was gathering strength. Ruth watched the change before either of Lydia's phones sounded. The updated forecast arrived 30 seconds later. Over the next 6 hours, the terminal changed function without changing shape. County survey crews left for Lantern Ridge with elevation equipment. Lydia established the west office as a planning point, while investigators retained control of the East Bay. Daniel helped turn Sam's radio marks into a provisional relay diagram. Harbor slept for 20 minutes beneath the desk, woke when Daniel moved, and followed him 3 steps before lying down again. At 7 that evening, Owen Pike entered the county operations office inland, carrying a laptop and a printed barge schedule. He gave his name before anyone asked. The complete log showed 9 unauthorized transfers, not 3. The Bellwether Dawn was scheduled to leave at midnight the following day, several hours before the first severe weather closure. Owen identified the access codes, vehicle assignments, and the call in which Wade had ordered Daniel's delivery rerouted. I told myself it was overflow, Owen said. I stopped asking because I needed the job to stay simple. The investigator across from him closed the folder gently. It was never simple. I know that now. By noon the next day, Lydia had May's roster, 200 names, 41 radio-qualified volunteers, 36 with generator or electrical experience, drivers with high-clearance vehicles, logistics coordinators, former medics now working civilian jobs, and enough alternates to keep every post covered through a night. The first Lantern Ridge report was cautious but encouraging. The northern culvert held. The surface-needed debris cleared in 2 places. The southern gate was locked but intact. More inspection remained before approval. Rain settled over Bracken Point before dawn on the second morning. Ruth stood at the radio office window with Sam's tide book closed beneath one hand. Daniel joined her. Harbor sat between them, watching droplets move down the glass. At first, Ruth thought the lights beyond the marsh belonged to survey trucks returning from Lantern Ridge. Then another pair appeared behind them, and another. The line rounded the coastal bend slowly, headlights reflecting across the wet road until distance turned them into one continuous ribbon of white. Utility trailers followed pickups. Antennas rose above several roofs. The vehicles extended past the curve and kept coming. Daniel did not smile. What crossed his face was quieter than that. Relief held inside discipline. Ruth looked from him to the long road and tightened her hand over Sam's notebook. 200 Marines were coming to the shoreline. The first vehicle stopped beneath the dead amber beacon at 4:14 on the second morning. The last did not reach the terminal road until nearly 8. They came in pickups, utility vans, aging 4-wheel drives, 2 bucket trucks, and 1 former school bus converted into a mobile radio shop. Some drivers were active-duty Marines on approved leave. Others were reservists or former Marines who had not worn a uniform in years. Everyone arrived as a civilian volunteer. No weapons, no unit banners, no suggestion that the Marine Corps had ordered anyone to Bracken Point. May Alvarez stepped from the lead truck, carrying a waterproof binder beneath her rain jacket. She was 51, broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair cut close at the sides and the composed face of someone who had spent a lifetime turning large problems into labeled sections. Lydia met her beside the West office. "Roster?" Lydia asked. May handed over the binder. 200 people, names, skills, current assignments, vehicle types, medical qualifications, and emergency contacts. 41 radio qualified, 36 generator or electrical, 28 transport drivers, the rest logistics, route clearing, food, water, and civilian medical support. Command structure, yours for emergency operations, mine for volunteer accountability. Weapons, prohibited. Anyone came here looking for North Star? May looked past Lydia toward Daniel, who stood under the awning with Harbor. Not after I spoke to them. Lydia opened the binder. Then we can work. That was how 200 Marines arrived on the shoreline, not with a demand for names or a promise of revenge, but with a question. Which communication station needed help first? Ruth heard it repeated in different forms as people checked in. Where did the generators go? Which roads still needed survey? Who had the county frequencies? Where could they fill water containers without blocking emergency traffic? The answers accumulated faster than she could process them. Someone recognized her near the office door. "Mrs. Calder?" A young man with rain streaming from his cap stopped in front of her. "Staff Sergeant Cross told us what you did." Ruth glanced toward Daniel. "Did he?" The young man lifted his phone, uncertain whether to ask for a photograph. May appeared beside him. "She is not an attraction, Corporal." The phone disappeared. May turned to Ruth. "You know the building and the old radio system. That makes you station lead until you tell me otherwise." "I am 72. The equipment has not objected." Ruth considered her. "You and I may get along." That would be efficient. By mid-morning, the terminal grounds had been divided into marked work zones. The East Maintenance Bay remained under evidence control. Volunteers used the West office, Public's parking area, and former passenger shelter only after Lydia's team cleared them. May assigned colored tape rather than military terminology. Blue for radio, yellow for power, green for transport, white for supplies. Daniel took the relay diagram he had built from Sam's notes and briefed the radio teams. His wrists were wrapped, and he kept flexing his left hand when he thought nobody was watching. Harbor rested beneath the map table, awake but still, following Daniel with his eyes. 5 proposed sites, Daniel said. Terminal, Marina Rise, Heron Cut North, Lantern Ridge Midpoint, and the Forestry Road Gate. No site goes active until emergency management confirms access and safety. We use county call signs, not personal ones. A former Marine in an electrician's jacket raised a hand. "What about the old base set?" Ruth looked at Sam's radio. "It receives. Transmit has been temperamental since 2019. Technical term, accurate term. The power team rolled 2 generators into the covered service area. When the first started, vibration traveled through the old floor into Ruth's shoes. A second engine joined it, then a third. The whole West office seemed to awaken beneath her feet. Glass humming in the windows, loose screws trembling in metal trays, Harbor lifting his head at the change. Daniel keyed Sam's radio. Nothing answered, not static, not a click. The floor continued to vibrate, full of new power, while the one machine they needed remained silent. Ruth rested 2 fingers against its metal casing. Sam always said a radio that goes completely quiet is usually protecting itself. She opened the side panel. A ceramic fuse had loosened during the generator startup. She seated it, waited for the meter to rise, then nodded to Daniel. He keyed the microphone again. This time, a relay technician in the parking lot answered immediately. Terminal base, receiving clear. Nobody cheered. They simply wrote the result on the board and moved to the next task. Ruth appreciated that more than cheering. The Lantern Ridge survey returned at 9:30. Lydia spread fresh measurements beside Sam's chart. The northern culvert was sound. 2 fallen limbs required removal. The shell surface remained above the projected surge level across most of the route. The narrowest section could pass vans and pickups in one direction at a time, but not full-size buses. Southern Gate? Daniel asked. Locked, intact, and outside the flood basin, Lydia said. Forestry Service is bringing the key. Ruth followed the new elevation marks. They landed within inches of Sam's pencil notes. Lydia looked at her. He was careful. He disliked being surprised by water. So do I. Lydia signed the provisional authorization. Lantern Ridge is approved for controlled one-way evacuation traffic, high-clearance vehicles only. No public self-routing. Every vehicle enters through a staff checkpoint. The route teams left before the ink dried. North Star's case developed in a separate room, managed by people who did not need Daniel or Ruth standing over them. Owen Pike's complete logs tied 9 unauthorized loads to the Bellwether Dawn. Ruth's photographs linked at least 1 crate to the regional medical center. The barge was still moored at a private landing 15 miles south, scheduled to depart before midnight. Authorities reached it shortly before noon. There was no dramatic confrontation. The captain complied with an order to remain at the dock. Inspectors found generators and insulated medical units with altered shipping labels in the cargo hold. The equipment stayed where it was until it could be documented and released. Wade Mercer had remained silent through the morning. Then, investigators played part of a dispatch recording recovered from Owen's system. Calvin Roke's voice instructed Wade not to move anything from the east shed if conditions worsened. The approaching surge, Roke said, would settle whatever remained. Wade asked for the recording a second time. He knew Cross and the dog were still inside when he said that? Wade asked. The investigator did not answer for him. He replayed the timestamp. Wade looked down at his hands. I'll show you the overflow sites. By mid-afternoon, the first released equipment reached the terminal under county supervision. Radio packs went to Daniel's teams. Portable generators moved to the medical annex and relay points. Cooling units returned to the regional center. None of it belonged to the volunteers, and nobody treated recovery as a prize. Ruth watched a generator leave for Heron Cut, bearing the blue medical center code that had been hidden beneath white tape. She thought of Harbor's nose at the false wall. The dog had not known what the crate meant. He had only known that something belonging to Daniel was behind it. Sometimes evidence began with knowledge that small. The storm advanced faster than the forecast models had allowed. By 4, wind drove rain sideways across the terminal. By 5, water covered the lowest marina road. Lydia moved the emergency operations board into the West office and activated all 5 relay sites. May distributed the volunteers before conditions worsened. 38 at communications points, 62 assigned to transport and route control, 24 supporting medical sites, and the remainder rotating through power, supplies, food, rest coverage, and contingency crews. 200 people became useful by ceasing to look like a crowd. Ruth stood at the doorway and watched the final transport team leave. A Harbor came beside her, close enough that his shoulder touched the side of her leg. He did not lean heavily or ask for attention. He simply occupied the space, steady and warm against the cold draft. He does that when a room gets too loud, Daniel said behind her. The room is outside. He has a generous definition. Ruth rested her fingers briefly between Harbor's ears. Across the lot, volunteers she had never met carried Sam's frequency notes in waterproof sleeves. The sight should have felt like intrusion. Instead, it felt like opening a window in a building that had been closed too long. Daniel remained at the terminal with Ruth and Harbor. He checked every relay twice, then started a third round. May removed the pencil from his hand. The checks are current. Conditions changed. They will continue changing whether you personally supervise each raindrop or not. He looked at the map instead of answering. At 5:47, Lydia's phone rang. She listened for less than 10 seconds. "Close it," she said. "Now." The main bridge approach had begun taking water 3 hours ahead of projection. County engineers were closing both lanes before wind made the barrier gates unsafe to operate. Lydia marked the bridge red on the board. For a moment, everyone in the office understood the same thing. Bracken Point no longer had a primary evacuation route. It had Sam's old service road, 5 radio stations, and a network built that morning. The first controlled convoy had already entered Lantern Ridge from the south. 7 high-clearance vans carrying adults from the Marina District and Medical Annex. Relay 4 had logged them at the gate 12 minutes earlier. Daniel called Relay 3, no answer. He called again. Static filled the office. Relay 4 broke in, its operator speaking over wind. "Terminal, water is above the forecast mark at the midpoint crossing. We have no visual on Convoy 1. Daniel looked at the dark indicator between Heron Cut and Lantern Ridge. The bridge was closed, the storm was strengthening, and somewhere between 2 working radios, the first evacuation convoy had disappeared. Daniel called Relay 3 a third time. Static pressed through the West Office speakers, rising and falling with the wind. On the wall map, the indicator between Heron Cut and Lantern Ridge remained dark. 7 vans carrying adults from the Marina District and Medical Annex had entered the route. Relay 4 had seen their headlights leave the southern gate. Relay 3 had never reported their arrival. Daniel reached for his rain jacket. May caught the sleeve before he could put it on. "Where are you going?" "Midpoint crossing?" "With what road clearance?" "I can reach it from the north." "You do not know that." "I know 7 vehicles are missing." May held his gaze. "And I know every field team is using the relay diagram in your head. If you leave, we trade 1 unknown for 6. Daniel looked toward the door. Wind forced rain beneath its lower edge in thin, moving lines. Harbor stood when Daniel moved, ready to follow. "Cross," May said, quieter now. "Your job is here." The words landed badly because they were correct. Daniel removed his hand from the jacket. "Send Route Team 2 from the north checkpoint. 2 vehicles, no more. They stop the moment water crosses the marked travel surface." May keyed her handheld radio. "Already moving." Ruth remained at Sam's base set, listening to the empty frequency. The storm had turned the old terminal into an instrument. Wind played the roof in low notes. Rain rattled the windows. Generator vibration rose through the floor, while every loose object answered in its own small voice. Lydia marked the bridge closure in red and reorganized transport without raising hers. The second convoy would hold at the medical annex. A third, waiting near Heron Cut, would not enter Lantern Ridge until the first was located. Volunteers at the marina moved residents upstairs rather than risk unverified roads. 200 people were deployed across the coast, but the office itself held only 7. Ruth, Daniel, May, Lydia, 2 radio operators, and a power technician. Harbor made 8 if usefulness counted more than paperwork. Relay 4 to terminal. A voice broke through. Route Team 2 entered north approach. Travel surface is dry. Runoff remains below the shoulder. Visibility poor, Daniel answered. Acknowledge every half mile. Watch for tire marks leaving the shell bed. Copy. He placed a pencil beside the dark indicator. His wrapped wrist shook once, almost invisibly, before he steadied it. Ruth saw the motion. She also saw that he did not reach for his jacket again. "You are doing more from that chair than you would in a ditch," she said. "It does not feel like more." Feelings have never been reliable measuring equipment. Harbers came to Daniel's side and pressed his shoulder against the man's knee. Daniel rested one palm on the dog's back without looking down. The first scent of hot insulation reached Ruth a minute later. It was faint beneath rain, salt, wet clothing, and generator exhaust. A dry, sharp smell like an old toaster left on too long. Ruth lifted her head. "Kill the auxiliary feed," she said. The power technician looked up from his meter. "Readings are stable." "Kill it." He hesitated only long enough to confirm which breaker she meant. The moment he opened it, the smell weakened. Ruth crossed to the distribution panel and held the back of her fingers near each conduit without touching bare metal. The cable feeding the temporary charging table radiated heat. Too many handheld units had been connected to a circuit Sam designed for office lights and one coffee maker. "This line is cooking inside the wall." The technician checked with an infrared meter. His expression changed. "She's right. 12 degrees above safe rise and climbing." They shifted the charging table to a dedicated generator circuit. For 11 seconds during transfer, Sam's radio went dark. Daniel stared at the dead meter. Then backup power engaged. Static returned, followed immediately by a broken voice. "Team 2 to terminal, found tracks." Daniel keyed the microphone. "Say again." 7 sets. They left the main shell bed at mile 4. Looks deliberate. Following. Ruth leaned over Sam's chart. "There was a packing house spur near mile 4, close before the ferry. Higher or lower?" Daniel asked. "Higher by 2 feet. Dead end, but high." He relayed the information. 3 minutes later, Route Team 2 found Convoy 1 parked nose to tail on the old spur. A wind-thrown pine had pulled down the Relay 3 antenna cable and blocked part of Lantern Ridge. The convoy leader had seen water crossing ahead, moved everyone to the spur, and attempted to report with a handheld set. The ridge and storm had swallowed the low-power signal. "All 7 vehicles accounted for," Route Team 2 reported. "All passengers stable. Need the north obstruction cleared before movement." No one cheered. Relief passed through the room in smaller ways. Lydia released a breath. May lowered her radio. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them and began giving instructions. "Keep the convoy on the spur. Send the saw crew from Relay 2. Nobody enters standing water. Radio tech goes with them. Tethered work only from dry ground." "Copy." The storm settled fully over Bracken Point after sunset. Cellular service failed south of the bridge. The county emergency website stopped updating. For the people below Heron Cut, the 5 radio points became the only continuous chain to the mainland. The Marines and former Marines along the route worked as operators, drivers, generator technicians, and traffic guides. They did not act as police. They did not enter homes without requests from local personnel. At each checkpoint, they logged names, destinations, road depth, vehicle movement, and fuel. May had taught them that service became trustworthy when someone could account for it afterward. At the medical annex, 6 volunteers carried battery packs up a stairwell after water reached the ground floor loading area. At Heron Cut, a generator mechanic built a rain shield from ferry canvas and kept the relay dry without enclosing its exhaust. Near the forestry gate, transport drivers turned their vehicles sideways to block wind from the passenger transfer point, leaving enough distance for safe ventilation. None of the actions looked dramatic from the terminal. They arrived as brief radio reports, check marks, and fuel numbers. That was the scale Daniel was learning to see. A rescue did not always have one person at its center. Sometimes it was 40 small decisions made by people who never met, each one preventing the next problem from becoming larger. Ruth listened to the reports while Harbor slept lightly beneath the desk. Every few minutes, a burst of wind made the west window flex in its frame. Harbor would open his eyes, locate Daniel, then settle again when Daniel's posture remained calm. Ruth understood the exchange without assigning human language to it. The dog watched what he had been trained to watch. The man, in return, measured himself because the dog was watching. The saw crew removed the pine in sections. A radio technician found the antenna feed pulled loose but undamaged. Rain made direct repair unsafe, so Daniel guided him to reroute a spare cable through the protected side of the relay shelter. "Connector seated," the technician said. "Do not power yet," Daniel replied. "Check the ground. Ground secure. Now power." The dark midpoint indicator flickered amber, failed, then returned green. "Relay 3 to terminal," the operator said. "Receiving clear." Convoy 1 resumed north under escort. When its 7 vans reached the terminal checkpoint, Lydia authorized Convoy 2 onto Lantern Ridge, then Convoy 3. Hour by hour, the board filled. Marina Rise, green. Medical Annex, green. Heron, Cut, North, green. Lantern Ridge, Midpoint, green. Forestry Gate, green. The last transport movement carried adults from a low apartment complex near the southern marina. They were not in immediate distress, but the rising water would remove their option by midnight. 4 high-clearance vans entered Lantern Ridge at 10:42. The South Gate confirmed departure. Relay 4 confirmed passage. Relay 3 confirmed 2 vans, then lost the next transmission beneath a burst of static. Daniel waited 10 seconds and called again. No answer. May stood behind him, but did not speak. Ruth watched his hand move toward the rain jacket hanging on the chair. It stopped before touching it. Relay 3 terminal, confirmed final convoy count. Static. Daniel checked the clock. Relay 2, do you have visual northbound? Negative. Visibility less than 50 yards. The map was green everywhere except the final convoy marker. That one remained dark. Daniel could not force the road to answer. He could not supervise each driver or hold every antenna upright against the wind. All he could do was keep the frequency clear, trust people positioned beyond his sight, and be ready when information arrived. Harbor remained beside him. The dog's breathing was slow now, though his ears turned toward every break in the radio noise. 28 seconds passed, then Relay 3 came through. Terminal, final convoy, count 4. All vehicles past midpoint. Brief stop for debris. No injuries, continuing north. Daniel marked the board. Relay 2 confirmed headlights 12 minutes later. The forestry gate confirmed all 4 vans through at 11:17. Lydia compared the transport manifest against the destination log, line by line, until every name and vehicle matched. All checkpoints accounted for, she said. Ruth turned the final indicator from amber to green. Across the board, Sam's old route shone as an unbroken chain of small lights. 200 volunteers had arrived at the coast because 1 Marine and 1 dog had been found in chains. What they built afterward kept entire neighborhoods visible through the storm. Daniel sat back. For the first time since Ruth entered the shed, he allowed both hands to rest empty on the desk. Harbor circled once beneath the radio table, folded his legs, and lay down. Morning reached Bracken Point slowly, filtered through retreating rain in a ceiling of torn gray cloud. The storm had removed shingles, folded signs, pushed boats into places boats did not belong, and covered the lower marina road with reeds and shell. It had not erased any community from the communications map. In the West Radio office, 5 green relay indicators still glowed. Across the coast, dispatchers who had expected dead zones were hearing all 5 Bracken Point call signs. Before 7, emergency offices in 3 neighboring counties had asked Lydia for the relay map and volunteer plan. The speed of it, not a military deployment, but 200 civilians building under local command, had traveled farther than the storm reports. Ruth woke in Sam's chair with a folded rain jacket beneath her head. For a moment, she did not know why the room held so many sleeping people. Then a handheld radio clicked softly near the window. Harbor lifted his head from beneath the map table, and the night returned in pieces. Daniel sat against the wall with his eyes closed and 1 hand resting on Harbor's back. May was asleep upright in another chair, arms crossed. Lydia had not slept at all. She stood over the transport manifest, comparing the final shelter counts with the night's movement logs. Still matched? Ruth asked. Still matched, Lydia said. Outside, volunteers were already checking generators and replacing wet cable. Nobody announced the morning as a victory. There were roads to clear, fuel to account for, and people at shelters who needed breakfast. The 200 Marines had arrived as a crowd only from a distance. Up close, they remained individuals carrying extension cords, water containers, clipboards, and coffee. The first groups left before noon. Radio operators stayed until county replacements reached every relay. Transport drivers moved shelter residents to temporary housing. Generator teams delivered equipment to buildings still without power. May released volunteers by assignment rather than all at once, so there was no long departure column and no ceremony designed for cameras. A former Marine electrician returned Sam's spare fuse box to Ruth, with every used part listed on an index card. "You counted washers?" she asked. May checks the cards. "Then you were wise." Daniel remained at the terminal. His wrist wraps had loosened, and the strain in his face had eased into fatigue. He helped dismantle the temporary charging table, but did not take over when someone else knew the work. Ruth noticed this because it would have been easy not to. Harbor followed him from room to room until Ruth sat on the office step with a piece of toast. Then the shepherd came to her, sniffed the toast, and settled close enough for his shoulder to rest against her shin. "He believes you have resources," Daniel said. "He is correct." She broke off a piece only after asking Daniel. Harbor took it carefully and waited without demanding another. The legal consequences of North Star developed over weeks rather than hours. Investigators recovered the 9 diverted shipments identified in Owen's records. The regional medical center received its cooling units, portable radios returned to county stock, and the remaining generators were assigned to the communities listed on their original documents. Owen accepted responsibility for rerouting Daniel and for ignoring discrepancies he should have reported. His cooperation did not erase those choices, but it gave investigators the vehicle logs and access history they needed. Wade provided a complete account of the confinement at the terminal and the order to leave the east shed sealed. Calvin Roque and the men directly involved faced charges through the ordinary court process. Ruth followed none of it closely enough to become an expert. She gave one formal statement, corrected the spelling of Sam's name twice, and refused every interview request that arrived afterward. She had no interest in becoming a public version of herself. What interested her was the West office. 3 days after the storm, Lydia met Ruth there with a county engineer and a folder thick enough to indicate either serious planning or poor restraint. "We want to establish a seasonal communications point," Lydia said. "June through November, storm activation is needed. County equipment, trained volunteer operators, annual inspection." Ruth looked at the repaired base radio. "Here, the East Bay remains separate. This office already proved it can support a relay. Lantern Ridge will be added to the emergency plan after road work and public review." "And what are you calling this communications point?" Lydia glanced at Daniel, who was standing by the window with Harbor. "That part is not settled." Ruth understood the glance. "No." Daniel did not pretend to misunderstand. No to the station or no to the name. No to turning Sam into a sign. The answer came sharper than she intended. Harbor looked toward her, then back to Daniel. Nobody rushed to soften the room. Ruth placed both hands on the desk. "People decide a man meant whatever makes the best plaque. Sam did not like plaques. He liked equipment that worked and people who put tools back where they found them. Then the station should require both," Daniel said. "That is not the point." "I think it is." He came closer but remained on the opposite side of the desk. "You kept his records private because they belonged to the two of you. That made sense. Then the storm came, and those records became useful to people he never met." Ruth looked down at the tide book. Daniel continued, "A signal doesn't lose its meaning because more people can see it. Being seen is the work." She did not answer that day. She answered a week later by carrying Sam's brass nameplate to Lydia's office. It had once been fixed above the radio desk and read, "S. Calder, Maintenance." Ruth placed it on Lydia's folder. "Calder Watch Station," she said. "For the work, not the man on a plaque." Lydia nodded. "For the work." The station opened quietly the following spring. Volunteers trained on county frequencies, generator safety, Lantern Ridge checkpoints, and the rule that no handwritten route became official until present conditions confirmed it. Ruth attended every session and corrected instructors when they used the wrong name for a ferry component. Daniel returned to duty before the first training weekend, but he called the station every Thursday evening when his schedule allowed. He never asked Ruth whether she was taking care of herself. He asked which relay had failed its battery test, whether the forestry gate key had been duplicated, and whether Harbor's donated travel bowl had been placed where she wanted it. Ruth answered because these were useful questions. May visited twice to audit the volunteer roster. Lydia insisted on storm drills in clear weather, when mistakes could be examined without urgency. During the second drill, a new operator skipped a location confirmation, and Ruth made the entire network repeat the check. Nobody forgot again. The people of Bracken Point gradually stopped referring to the building as the old ferry office. They said Calder Watch when discussing weather, training, or the place where spare batteries were kept. Ruth discovered that Sam's name could enter ordinary speech without becoming a monument. It could remain attached to schedules, keys, coffee, and work. The old amber beacon remained dark. Its motor had seized years earlier, and the lens housing had taken salt through a cracked seal. Ruth left it alone until the next September, 1 year after she first heard Harbor behind the maintenance shed. Daniel arrived on a Thursday morning in the same pickup he had driven before the North Star ambush, repaired and repainted. Harbor rode behind him in a secured travel crate. When Daniel opened it, the shepherd stepped down, tested the air, and turned toward the west office. Ruth stood in the doorway. Harbor approached at a trot, slowed within several feet, and sniffed. His ears eased back. His tail moved once, then again. He closed the remaining distance and pressed his shoulder against her leg in the same steady way he had during the storm. "He remembers," Daniel said. "He confirms," Ruth replied, scratching lightly beneath the faded blue collar. "Remembering is a larger claim." Daniel smiled. "I missed being corrected." Inside, Ruth poured coffee from the station pot. She took one sip and stopped. It was bitter, overstrong, and carried the faint scorched taste of grounds left too long on heat. Exactly the way Sam had made it when weather kept him at the terminal overnight. For one instant, the taste returned an entire room that no longer existed. Sam leaning over a chart, rain against the old windows, his pencil held behind one ear, asking whether Ruth wanted coffee when he knew she did. Daniel watched her face. Bad? Consistent. She drank again and decided not to change the recipe. They spent the afternoon on the beacon. Daniel replaced the Sea's drive motor, Ruth cleaned the lens and installed a new weather seal. Harbor lay in the shade beneath the tower, rising whenever Daniel descended the ladder, and settling when both people were back on the ground. At sunset, the work was ready. The control switch remained in the west office where Sam had mounted it decades earlier. Daniel stood before it, then stepped aside for Ruth. "You do it," she said. "It is your station. It is doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Wasting time." Daniel placed his hand on the switch. Ruth put hers over his. Together, they pushed it upward. Above the roof, the motor engaged with a low, steady turn. Amber light crossed the office window, moved over the darkening marsh, and swept out across the water. It disappeared, then returned at the exact interval Sam had written in the maintenance book. The base radio crackled. "Calder watch, this is Forestry Gate." The distant operator paused. "Beacon visible, signal clear." Ruth looked through the window as the light crossed the coast again. Daniel stood beside her. Harbor settled between them, his breathing quiet beneath the sound of the turning motor. The beacon kept moving over the water, useful beyond the life of the man who built it, carrying no explanation and asking for no recognition. It simply stayed on long enough for someone far away to know where home was. Ruth Calder never thought of herself as brave. She heard a dog barking behind a locked shed, found a Marine in chains, and used the tools she already had. That was her lesson. Courage does not always arrive as confidence. Sometimes it arrives as an ordinary person deciding that another person's fear matters more than her own hesitation. Daniel Cross had spent years believing strength meant carrying every burden himself. But the moment that changed him most was not when he escaped the chains. It was when he stayed at the radio during the storm and trusted people beyond his sight to do their jobs. He learned that accepting help does not diminish service. It expands what service can reach. And Harbor never needed to understand the whole story. He gave the signal he had been trained to give. He recognized Daniel's scent behind a wall. He stayed close when a room became too loud. One dog doing a few grounded things well helped uncover stolen relief supplies and connected two people who might otherwise have remained strangers. Sam's beacon carried the final truth. A useful life does not end when the person who built it is gone. It continues in the tools they maintained, the knowledge they shared, and the people willing to keep the light moving. What looks like a miracle from far away is often a chain of small, responsible choices made at the right time. Today, you may not have a storm relay to build or a chain to cut, but you can still keep a signal alive. Check on the neighbor who has gone quiet. Learn one practical skill that could help someone else. Answer the call you would usually assume another person will handle. If this story reminded you of someone who kept a light on for others, share it with them. Tell us in the comments, who has been a signal of hope in your life? And subscribe with notifications on for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the ordinary choices that bring people home.